Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. It's Monday. New week, new theme. This week's theme is an excessive amount of blank. And we have Boris. I kind of already know what the excessive amount is on this one. Probably noise. Right, let's be honest. Y'all had me listen to Feedbacker, all 5 parts of that, not that long ago. That was probably late last year, I believe. Now, granted, we only have 10 minutes of Boris today. They've been very miss with me in the past, though. Interesting things to talk about, not things I've enjoyed listening to. So, let's dive into some Boris today off of their Pink album from 2006. The track is Just Abandoned Myself. That is a very fuzzy press sound. It's also interestingly louder than the vocals. It's like a solid alternative or a hard rock sound of the 2000s with the EQ massively put into wild directions. An unconventionally mixed rock song. Guitar chords, great bass licks, interesting lead guitar lines off on the side, catchy vocals. Both interesting guitar licks, rhythms. And look at the volume over there, all the way on the left. Not moving at all. This is full sound all the time. Just a massive atmosphere. Now, interestingly, we are coming up on the 3.5-4 minute mark here, where a song like this would traditionally end. How is Boris going to extend this out to 3 times its length? listening to them wear their inspirations on their sleeve while sounding nothing like that which has inspired them. Anyone else getting tired of listening to this at this point? Not necessarily because of the composition. I think they're doing a great job at crafting atmosphere here and subverting the high energy punkiness of earlier. But the production is very fatiguing. And I'm curious if I'm the only one who feels that. Interestingly, it seems they went from subversion to deconstruction here. An interesting parallel to abandoning of the self. Music. We'll talk about that in a second. I think I mentioned that phrase a little prematurely. feel like it's getting louder. It's been full volume. Where's the sound coming from? Just stop. All right. I said I hate this. Now, granted, the droning, not my cup of tea. So, it kind of felt like it lined up there. That's not why I mentioned it though. What I hate about this is that Boris continues to do this where they will make music that is pretty much not for me. I'm not the audience for them. Sometimes they will do some stuff that interests me. Even Feedbacker, as much of that album that bounced off of me, there were still some parts in it that I genuinely enjoyed. But the majority of what I've heard from them is I'm not their audience. It's not for me. Not my kind of music. But consistently, this group will make music that I feel I must talk about, that compels me to talk about things that very rarely pop up on the channel at all. They are doing very cool artistic ideas. Sonically, not for me. Artistically, I'm sold every single time. And so it's what I hate about it is that I kind of wish there was a part of this where I could just take 5 minutes and say, well, I kind of enjoyed the beginning, kind of had like a pop punk thing going on, but with weird production. And then they did some drone, and it's what Boris does. I didn't really like much of it. There's my review, moving on. And kind of wrap the video up rather quickly, but I don't think that's going to happen today. I can't do that with Boris. They challenge me in ways that I find intriguing. And so we're going to have a talk about this. The first thing, and I think the most important, everything else is going to be a bit more borderline subjectivity. But at least right here, I want to talk about what the song is doing. We kick the song off with some pop punk. A little bit of like an alternative rock flair as far as the part of the chord progression goes. If I get rid of the production of it and just listen to the chords, the catchy melodies, the bass licks, I'm very familiar with this. It's a very comfortable sound for me. And honestly, if the production were different, I'd probably be really into it. It's kind of up my alley, but in a different way. But what they do with this is they eventually reach a point, and I even called this out. Around 3.5 minutes in, I said, this is the alternative rock song here. We've had 2 verses, 2 choruses. We just exited the bridge. We're in the final chorus. What does Boris do from here? They can't lean on this trope any longer. The trope is over. And from here on, for the rest of the track, we pretty much have a slow burn. It kicks off with some guitar solos, some guitar duets. The drums play around with ideas. We change from our punkier beat into just quarter note bass kicks into a rockier beat. Then the drums cut out entirely. This whole section here of kind of mixing the noise with the melody to create melodic elements out of the guitar, the shifting drum pulse, eventually the drum cutting out all the way. This is a way of shifting away from what we were playing. The beginning of the song, production aside, is very palatable, very mainstream, especially when this came out. I mean, we're talking 06, so maybe a little late for it. This definitely has more of a 90s alt rock, hard rock sound, but like late 90s. So they're really not that far behind the curve on it. It definitely would have felt right then. And they play it straight. Like I said, the structure of it, the riffage, there's a couple of odd things. We have that guitar off to the left, kind of just making noise at times. It wants to be melodic most of the time, but it's also got some tension stuff going on timbre And on harmony, we'll touch on that later. It's a little awkward for a more traditional sound, but generally speaking, we have a very traditional alternative rock track here. And then we say, well, what if we get rid of the catchy vocals? What's left? Well, we got atmosphere, we got chord progressions, we have some guitar licks, some bass licks, and some very fun drumming. In fact, this was the point where I feel like the drums opened up the most. We got to explore some neat, punkier drum fills. The drummer got to open up a little bit. We had those offbeat ride cymbal hits, kind of creating a bounciness on top of a song that was already fairly bouncy, especially when you take in the accents on beats 2 and 4 throughout a majority of this track. It feels like the guitars emphasize beats 1 and 3, and then the snare emphasizes 2 and 4, and you kind of have this bounciness between those two sets of that hurt between those two sets of accents. And it creates a bounciness. I really wanted to headbang on the snare to get that body movement, the sharper body movement on the snare hits, but it wants to follow those guitars, so the snare hits become the bounce up. If you're headbanging, you headbang down on the guitars and you come up on the snares, and both of them feel accentuated, both of them feel sharp. There is a constant forward momentum through this, a high energy component that just screams punk. The bounciness definitely leans into that, though maybe on a bit more of a poppier side. Eventually, though, like I mentioned, the drums cut out. We just have a bass kick on every quarter note. We've removed the bounciness and are exploring the atmosphere. What's the chord progression say? We're going to keep this quarter note beat. We're going to keep this progression moving. It's not going to feel like it's stagnant, but what does the song do with just chords? The drums come back in with a rock beat. Very straightforward, very metronomic, not really bouncy at all, completely alters the vibe of the thing. Before cutting out entirely, that doesn't stick around very long at all. I don't think the bass is present in the final couple of minutes of this track either. It's just the two guitars creating this massive wall. If the bass is in here, it's kind of sucked up into the wall of sound rather than being a distinct voice with those interesting bass lines that we had been hearing up to this point. And it's just the wall of sound. It's just the chords. A hyper focus on the notes and the texture of the instruments. I'd like to say it's just the chords, but honestly, it's also the compression, it's the distortion, it's the destruction of the original guitar sound to create this massive, fuzzy monstrosity of sounds. But you can still clearly hear those chords. What does this feel like? What does this sound like? Does it still feel punky? Does it still feel rocky? Eventually, more of the low end gets pulled out. We're just focusing on higher tones. The white noise still creating this drone, frequencies above what the pitches are. The song gets more and more hollow until it just stops. What starts out as a pretty traditional rock sound eventually becomes a subversion of that. It kind of starts as a subversion too, if you want to take it from a production angle. They're definitely putting their spin on it. But I think certainly by the 4-minute mark, we've begun to see how they've taken that blueprint as a foundation and have pretty much inverted it. What if we get rid of the catchy stuff? What if we change up the drum ideas? What if we focus entirely on atmosphere? No melodic guitar riffs at all. What if we put solos in here? Alt rock isn't really known for their solo work. And eventually, at a certain point, getting rid of subversion entirely and looking at deconstruction. Looking at hyper-focusing on a specific element, multiple specific elements of this style of composition. Focusing on the rhythms, and then the melodies, and then the harmonies. And eventually the harmonies in exclusion to everything else, where that is all that's left. I mentioned that the song feels very at home for me at the beginning. The chords, catchy vocals, even the drum part. I've heard music like that. Again, production aside. But it's interesting when you drill it down to what that actually is. 4 chords and a handful of notes in a small range above it. Is that interesting? I'd argue no. I did not enjoy the last 3 minutes of this track. It's not something I would go out of my way to listen to, but I also can't disagree that it is the core element of that same song we started this track off with. I think a lot of this just boils down to foundation isn't music. This is something that I've mentioned a lot of times, particularly with slower burns, atmospheric ideas, and drones, is that it might be interesting for a moment, but that they are foundational, not necessarily secondary in importance, but secondary in attention. That there needs to be something on top of that, some sort of growth, some sort of movement. Usually, like 90% of the time in modern music, that means a melody, whether it is a lead guitar part or a vocal part. Something for the ears to lean into. It's one of the reasons why I find purely harsh vocal metal work to kind of pass by me. The vocalist typically gets lead melody lines, and now your vocalist isn't doing that. And unless it's more of a progressive metal band, you usually don't have linear melody coming out of your guitars either. They're working on riffs. And so a lot of this ends up feeling secondary to me in attention. It all feels foundational. I'm waiting for that lead element to be put on top. And that's what we get here. We start off with a normal track and start removing the primary attention areas until we just have secondary attention areas. And to me, that's not really a song. But I think it's an interesting idea nonetheless to deconstruct this because, well, I don't know. Why is this so interesting to me? It comes to a conclusion I'm already aware of. But maybe it's trying to point something out through all of this. Maybe it's trying to say that the music at the beginning wasn't worth listening to begin with because there's just not really anything going on in it. This is an argument I've heard a lot of people make about popular mainstream music in general. I don't necessarily think this is why Boris is doing it, but it is a direction my mind went. Deconstruction is interesting when there's something interesting to be said through it. And that's really easy to do in novels, in film. In music, I think it's a little more difficult. I'm kind of hoping the lyrics might lean a little bit more into this, but one thing that I do like artistically, completely aside from the musical elements, is the emotional weight of this. This is a song that is stripping itself down to the bare minimum. It is losing the elements that are most catchy, that are going to grab most people's attention, and trying to figure out what lies beneath all of that, eventually just allowing the song to quit altogether. The title of the song is Just Abandon Myself. The concept of abandoning the self in general would be a way of stripping down, well, the id and the ego and the superego. I think those are the 3 parts of the id as described by Freud. Is that who did that? Been a long time since I've taken psych, entry level psych, so I might be a little off on that. But the concept of abandoning a self would be understanding what the parts of the self are and then removing them entirely. Now, this might be a little deeper than Boris wanted to take it. Maybe just the idea of abandoning myself is just walking away from who you are today. Maybe it just really is that simple. But from digging in probably a little bit too far, which is sort of my MO at this point, it is to understand the layers and fragments of something. And I would think to take the excruciating element or excruciating task of removing each and every one of them. If you don't know what you're abandoning, how can you leave it? And I think that's what this song does. It begins to identify the different aspects of the track, stripping them away slowly until there's just the core foundation. And once you've gotten rid of the foundation, now you can start fresh, which is the song returning to silence. You've gotten rid of all of the things that sit on the outside, but they're all supported by a central idea. I'm going to take this in a Disney direction for a second. While it probably isn't entirely accurate in the world of psychology, um, Inside Out uses this concept of core memories. These moments in life that were so impactful that they define a part of your personality. They are the foundation for the decisions you will make elsewhere in your life. And this idea of stripping the sections down, I think, would be interrogating the decisions you've made, trying to find the common patterns between them so that you can find the foundational element that has led you to make those decisions so that you can erase that. It's really difficult to erase the self as a general concept. You really need to figure out why you are the way you are, because otherwise you're just going to wipe clean the surface level stuff, but how you got to those surface level ideas will continue to exist, and so your future will kind of still be determined. You haven't changed who you are. You've just erased some of the ideas you've made recently without getting rid of the problem in general. Well, it's not really a problem, but the core idea there. You're treating the symptom at that point. And so I like this idea of stripping down everything until you get to the base foundation. How does a song start? Usually with chords, usually with an atmosphere. You'll build your melodies off of that. You'll build your harmonies off of that. Your emotional impact, the lyrics will be built off of how these chords feel. So much music begins on the harmonic layer as a foundation. They strip the song down to that and then obliterate it. I think from that perspective, I really like what this song is doing. I really hope the lyrics line up with that, because if so, this is perfect. If not, I might be grasping at straws here. I found a perfect read on it that maybe isn't supported by the artists. But as much praise as I have to give it, the elephant in the room here, I've talked about it a couple times, it's the production on it. It's interesting in the fact that they took a style of music and then messed with all of the balance of it. The guitars come in super loud. Well, the guitar, the acoustic, no. What is it? The rhythm guitar comes in super loud. Then everything else all at one time, the drums, the bass, the lead guitar, the vocals, they're all way too quiet. The rhythm guitar overpowers everything. This is interesting if we pair it back to what we were just talking about with how important the chord progression is, the atmosphere, the texture of the guitar is to understanding what the song is trying to do, how it might have even been the very first building block to this creation of this track. It's almost as if they're saying, this is the core, this is the heartbeat, why isn't this the loudest? It's obviously the most important. If you take it out, the song falls apart. You can take everything else out and the song still works, even if it's just on an atmospheric droning level. But if you take everything out but the lead melody, well, you're kind of missing things. You take everything out but the drums, it's neat, but it's not a song. But if you take everything but the chords out, you still have something that people can resonate with. The final few minutes of this song, despite being the same thing over and over, I found to be a little boring, works. There is a ton of music built on just chords and texture. I don't know if that's necessarily what they're trying to say here, putting the volume at the levels that they feel the instruments are most important to the compositional process. But it's very interesting to hear basically the engineering of this song tipped on its head. Pyramid, top at the bottom. Foundation above everything else. It feels like it shouldn't work. There's a lot of parts of me that say it doesn't work. but it does grow on me. It takes a while. 5 minutes in, I was finally starting to warm up to it. It's still not something I would reach out to play on my own, to grab the disc and put it into my CD player, but I did adapt. I think that's one of the most interesting things about art in general is what seems wild and eclectic on the first exposure can become normal on subsequent ones. Regardless, I do think that if this was produced in a more traditional manner, particularly the first 3.5 to 4 minutes, and cut down to just that 4 minute chunk, this would have been a massive single. I think it hits a lot of things right, captures the right amount of energy from a couple of different influences, and hits all the marks. Maybe a little generic, but I think it would have been a hit. That's not what they're trying to do here, but I want to point that out because I think that the production does a lot of job. It pulls a lot of its weight in making this song sound as foreign as it does. At one point during the reaction, I had mentioned that this sounds like a band wearing all of their inspirations on their sleeve. There really isn't a lot of unique compositional ideas in here, and yet it doesn't sound like anything that would have inspired them. That's not a common statement for me to make. Either you're doing something unique or you're doing something a bit more cookie cutter. You're either innovating or you're iterating. And sometimes there's some bleed over in there, but not like this. Very rarely can I hear your inspirations, but find that you're not making music like them. And I find that to be wildly intriguing about this in particular. I knew Boris was going to be loud. I knew it was going to be fuzzy and massive and noisy and wall of sound and texture based. I did not expect to find an alternative rock track that, in a different production style, I would absolutely have on repeat. It's catchy, great energy, great flow. The way that the guitars and the drums work together, the bass lines. I'm here for all that. The production is just awkward, esoteric, even a very unusual taste for this style of music, but is absolutely crucial and necessary, one, for Boris to put their stamp on it, but two, to do the deconstruction that they were going to go into. I think if they had stuck with more traditional production, I don't think the ending would have resonated or worked as well. Part of it might just be dumb luck. Like I said, this is the sound Boris normally goes for anyways. But there's probably a really good chance this was totally intentional too, knowing where their strengths lie as musicians and creating something interesting out of what is already something they do well. Like I said earlier, this is not my kind of music, but there is a lot to praise about it artistically. I'm going to dive into some lyrics here. Everything else gets a little nitpicky at this point and kind of just reinforces all of the ideas that I've already brought up. Understanding limitations, telling a story through your identity, using sounds from other bands in ways that's unexpected, creating emotional narrative writing out of a shift from traditional writing to, well, for me, what's a bit more esoteric, but honestly, when it comes to shoegaze, post-metal, the last few minutes of this track are pretty normal in the larger scheme of things. Very different for the style we start on. So, let me dive into some lyrics on that and see what's going on. This song's a little philosophical. I am certainly coming at it from a bias, trying to support my musical read, but I do think there is something here that follows through with it. The beginning says, "What is it that's on your mind with your eyes closed shut with words? What is it that's on your mind? ears tight shut, and overwhelming. The proof is that you just want to cry. You're afraid of the present, and loaded with the past, you suffer from thirst. Afraid of the future, losing the present. Could be a double entendre for a gift and the time right now. It says, and you lose, still suffer from thirst. So we have somebody who is totally overwhelmed by the world around them. Their eyes are tightly shut. Their ears are tightly shut. They are overwhelmed, and all they want to do is cry. They want to release from this pressure. Now, if the narrator truly does understand this person, this pressure is the past. It is the present. It's a want for something more, a want for something better, a want for life. I think the use here of suffering from thirst, in particular water, is necessary for life. It is one of those core things so central to living things in general on this planet that in a lot of media, water is metaphorically used, and even the color blue, which is usually, for whatever reason, aligned with water, metaphorically used as life. And here he says that you are thirsty, not just a normal kind of thirsty, but you're suffering from it so much so that you feel overwhelmed by everything. He basically says you want life, and you can't find it. We come back to another verse. He says, what is it on your mind with your eyes swollen up? I think this is interesting because where the eyes being closed the first time is voluntary, they are shutting their eyes. This time their eyes are swollen up. They have been attacked, beaten, hit in some way that has caused the damage around the eye for it to swell up. Now they're blind, not by choice. He says the world keeps dying. The one keeps dying. And if there is the one, therefore I am. So reverse the meaning and question myself. All of these meanings are superimposed and covering up. So I question myself. Not myself is one word. My hyphen self. To see what is ahead after making a choice. I like the idea of superimposing meanings on top of each other. What is the one? How does that define my existence? Why should I question myself? What does all of this mean? It doesn't mean anything in isolation. It means something worthwhile when put in the context of everything else. The self is a series of actions taken, decisions made that inform future actions and decisions. Personality is, a way to define what you like and what you don't like, but a lot of that is based off of what you've done in the past, what your experiences are, what decisions you've made, what actions you've taken, and more specifically, the consequences of those actions. If you did something and got a reward, you're probably more prone to do that again. And vice versa. You do something and absolutely trash results from that, you're more likely to avoid that situation and that action in the future. The self is a superimposing of your entire past. He says, so get over the meaning. Turn over the meaning and question the self. There's agonizing noises that are put into a line and a bunch of strings that are roaring and dazzling. I really like this. It makes me think of strings with metal on it, some sort of pieces of whatever that can hit each other and tingle and tangle and glisten and all sorts of other things. All of them rippling off of each other. The vibrations of one hitting another causes it to spin and collide with another, like musical dominoes. but also being metal, they refract light, creating a dazzling and roaring bunch of strings. This, I think, the ripple effect of all of it, creating such a cacophony of visuals and sounds, is the perfect showcasing of action, not just of myself, but how my actions can inform other people's actions, their characters, their selves. What we do does not exist in a vacuum, not within ourselves, certainly, and not within the world. It says, blurred sights are now gone, and I am here and everywhere else. Basically saying that there is an immense amount of clarity through viewing the world this way, of disintegrating the self and understanding what is truly happening here. He says, I am here and everywhere else. I really love that line because it removes the idea of the self as a unique agent within the world. Seeing themselves as no more than one of 8 billion, or probably at the time that this was written, 7 billion. Just another human whose actions, decisions, words will ripple and affect everyone around them, and they will ripple and affect those around them. Eventually, across your lifetime, your words and actions may have impacted somehow down a very long length of branching paths to affect everyone in the world. Not directly, but still. I am here and everywhere. I am human like everyone else. We are the one, not I. And there is no way that I can make any actions that don't weigh somehow on everyone else. We're all connected. And that connectedness is also an idea of looking at this bunch of strings. All of us making noises, all of us making lights together. The idea of stripping the self back to realize the truth of our existence matches very well with the idea of stripping back a song from very humble cookie cutter beginnings, in a sense, into the bare minimum, and understanding what it really is, a series of chords just like any other song. But that doesn't make it any less special. And that doesn't make you or I or anyone else any less special. The fact that we can reach out and affect so many people in our lives, outside of our lives, that's amazing. And I think that's what this song is trying to point towards. But these are just my thoughts on Boris's Just Abandoned Myself. What do you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Please put all of that and any other thoughts down into the comment section. I feel like I just spaced out. I feel like I had less uhs and ahs and pauses in there. It's like reading a script. The last 10 minutes don't feel real to me. I locked in on that one. I hope you all enjoyed that. That was a fun bit of lyrics to go through, but also to pair it to the music too. Just great stuff. Anyways, yeah, put your thoughts in the comments above that description box. In there's a link for Linktree. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server. There's a bunch of stuff in there. It's really easy to navigate. Just a bunch of rectangle buttons. You click on what you want. Go check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Those are also very easy buttons to click, but honestly, YouTube's really iffy about it. That's why you got to hit that bell. Make sure that you actually see my videos when I release them. Alright, that wraps it up for this one. We do have a special selection next. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.